then, you know, in defense of the cryptocurrency industry, I'm obviously a huge fan and you know, love this space a lot. But you know, it's always been criticized as you know, not being able to fulfill the objectives of, for example, being a store of value. That's been one of the big ones because of the volatility. But you know, Bitcoin is relatively young. It's about 11 years old now. And what we're seeing is that there's actually a huge amount of volatility in very many markets, be it the stock markets, be it commodities. And all of us have seen it in the last 6 weeks with the crash of a number of big stock exchanges and stocks around the world. The oil price crashed 300% literally overnight last week. And the Bitcoin advocates are saying, you know, it's not as volatile as everybody says. And a lot of people are actually turning to cryptocurrencies to say, actually, is this potentially a more stable store of value, because it hasn't experienced the same volatility as some currencies, oils, stock markets, etc. over this time. The other interesting part is that the US government seems to just have the ability to print money. So I think over the COVID crisis, they've injected about $2 trillion into the US economy. And, you know, as a South African and with our neighboring Zimbabwe, it's sometimes difficult for us to get our heads around how come the US can just print money and it doesn't affect them. You know, why do they have such low inflation? Whereas if we were to do the same thing, or historically what happened to Zimbabwe when they did the same thing, inflation gets out of control. And you know, I'm not an economist and I'm not an expert on this, but essentially the thinking behind this is that because the US dollar is the dominant currency around the world, in times of crisis, the demand for dollars goes up a huge amount. And we've seen that in recent weeks with the current rand dollar exchange rate. So while the US has the ability to print money, the rest of us end up buying that, and essentially it drives up inflation in our own countries. And they are exporting their inflation, if I can put it that way. So, you know, I foresee that in the coming months, we're going to see inflation, particularly on goods that have been imported from overseas. And I think the point of this in the COVID crisis is to say, how sustainable is this? How long can governments just keep printing money or pumping it into the economy? And if you look at something like Bitcoin, the supply of Bitcoin is limited, and it's not there just to, it's actually supposed to be a deflationary currency over time. And could something like this crisis be the trigger point to say that the current economic system that we have is actually not sustainable in the long term, because governments cannot just keep printing money every time we have a hiccup in the system. The final one is interesting, that a number of countries are issuing stimulus packages to their citizens. And what we found in recent weeks is that the demand for cryptocurrencies and the number of people opening accounts has increased a lot, where people are actually investing their money into cryptocurrencies, you know, possibly to test it out, or they are seeing it actually as a store of value against some of their own currencies in their countries. So yeah, so I think that's a very short overview. I see that there are some questions on the group, I think, that are coming through. Just a big thank you to the Novia team. Here's some of the people. If anybody does want to reach out, they've run some really good talks like this over recent weeks during the COVID lockdown. So I just encourage you to reach out to them for any more talks or anything else that you guys want to know.